Behold, my glorious supporter, True Mr.FOoT, has asked a very complicated question. He says, I have very mixed thoughts on the whole double super status and above 100% status thing Digital Extremes is implementing, because it seems to be missing the problem they are trying to fix. Discuss. Whoops, there's my why. I'm going to read you the rest of what Mr. Foot sent me, and we'll discuss it. Their goal is to increase build diversity because crit is king. We'll come back to that. This confuses him to no end because hybrid builds are and have been king because it is not about how hard you scale a stat, but how many stats you scale. Good explanation. Status has never been irrelevant in those builds. Indeed, in the current system, status has never been irrelevant. Hybrid has always been the best way to build everything. Crit has been getting more and more relevant in recent times, not because status sucks, but because Digital Extremes keeps on designing status immune enemies, making status an irrelevant stat in those situations, and the double status changes don't do anything for that. And 3, this change will probably benefit hybrid weapons as much, if not more, than other status-only weapons. On the other side, this is something myself and other players have wanted for a long time, and the optimist in me says it might really help the diversity of builds. Cool. Lots of stuff to discuss there, so I'm going to go through them one by one. First, a little bit of framing. I think that the operative thing to discuss here is whether status, like more than the normal amount we would use for a hybrid build, which is the baseline best thing for any build because math, and we'll get into that more. The question is, if like over status is what I'm going to call it, like red crit status, more than 100% status, the enhanced status they're adding. Is that over status going to add a new multiplier? Because if it doesn't, usually the trade-off is going to be run a hybrid build or run status, and then instead of the crit for your hybrid build, do over status instead. Because it's usually going to take about as many mods. Most builds, you have your base damage mod, your multi-shot, then you have like 2-ish status mods, 2-ish crit mods, and then maybe a last mod. So if you need 4, on average, status mods to get to 100% or more so that you have this like over status thing, then that is directly in replacement of a crit. Like you do crits or you get this over status, and then you just always have status. And you will always have status because they're both just multipliers. Crit and status are just damage. Status, when it's corrosive, is removing armor from the relevant targets, armored enemies, Grineer, and that's a damage multiplier, just like crit. When it's slash and viral, just damage multipliers. They ignore armor, they reduce enemy health, and then your slash proc is also making your slash damage do more of damage than it did over time. And gas, of course, it's an explosion that does more damage and then does damage over time in an area too. And when you hit multiple enemies, gas is a multiplier because you hit other enemies and then they proc each other. So status and crit, same thing, just damage multipliers. So we need to convert this whole discussion about status and crit and whatever. The reason for the misunderstanding is that it's just about damage multipliers, and everything is just a damage multiplier, or it isn't. So the reason that some status effects are currently not used is because they aren't damage multipliers in the same way other ones are. So for example, radiation has a good 75% chance bonus, percent bonus against alloy armor, the same way corrosive has a 75% damage bonus against ferrite armor. Good, right? But not so, because corrosive status effect is also a damage multiplier, which leaves radiation good but very far behind, to the point that it's usually wrong to use it. So that's radiation is not currently a competitive multiplier because it doesn't add the same like amount of or volume of multipliers, right? But what if it did? What if it got an enhanced status effect that was like a Bane effect? You get faction damage bonus, which is a separate multiplier when you get over 100% status and you proc radiation. Okay? So the problem there is that to get that, it's just another multiplier. Everything's a multiplier. So how many mods do you need to get the multiplier? Because the best damage we're going to do is if we can use the fewest mods to get the most multipliers. To get corrosive as a multiplier, removing armor and stuff, or like viral or slash or gas, let's say, you only need 2 status mods. So if you need 4 to get radiation as a Bane effect, if that multiplier isn't not just twice as strong as what you would have gotten from the status you didn't get a multiplier from, like corrosive, and the crit that you don't have because you had to run 4 mods instead of 2, that multiplier has to be not just twice as strong as those other multipliers. It has to be like to the second power strong. It has to the multiplier has to multiply itself, all things being equal. Of course, if it's like an absurd value, that might change. Like if it's a Bane effect and it's like a normal Bane effect, we're talking like 50 to 75%. That would be probably not good because you're running 4 mods for a damage multiplying effect that is on the same level as one you could have gotten from 2 mods, and you could have gotten another one from 2 other mods too, so that's not viable. But obviously if the Bane effect was like 400%, then clearly that would be really good. It would also probably be pretty overpowered because there would be times when you'd be able to get it without 4 mods. So all things being equal, we would assume that if you get another multiplier from your over status, your enhanced status over 100%, once this update drops, that multiplier will probably should be more like a multiplier we already have. So like what you get if you added a Bane effect. Of course, that means it's not good because you could also just add a Bane mod, So the question here becomes, what do we want? Like, what is our stated goal when we talk about what we think should happen? And how would we get that? And would it be a good thing to swap from what we currently have to this new thing? So let me go through your points, but I wanted to set up that premise, which actually, lol, took a long time. 6.5 minutes into the video, hey! But that's mostly what I have to say, is that I think the operative thing is thinking about multipliers. And one way to think about your second point about like liches are status immune, which is a bit silly, why not just make them vulnerable to status? One good reason to make them vulnerable to status is that it promotes build diversity, because it allows more multipliers to be relevant against liches, which is a good thing. The way to get build diversity, you could look at it as making more multipliers available, but another way to look at it is you have to make sure those multipliers are actually usable, If you make a type of enemy where the multipliers just don't do anything, that's bad because it makes builds that make sense mathematically bad, which is silly. But it's also bad because it does hurt build diversity. It is not bad for build diversity in the sense that you might view it as, I'll keep a weapon around that's good against liches, and then I'll keep other weapons around that are good against like the actual enemies in the game that work with the game mechanics. But I would argue that that's a shallow form of build diversity compared to simply making liches interact with the game normally, and then making different stuff good against them, For example, what if liches had shields on top of that, and those shields recharged every 25% health they had? Magnetic sounds a lot better in that situation, because you can keep it off. You put the magnetic proc on, and then when they get those shields back, they get back way less, especially with shields becoming a more potent defense mechanism now. And if you simply give liches what I call armor gates, kind of like shield gates, these are basically phases. 25% of lich's health, it gets back all its armor and purges all status effects. Let's say it has shields too, and it gets back those. Right? That would be a great system that immediately fixes the problem. There's no need to make liches status immune. Just do that. And then, they're not instantly annihilated by status. And you can still use weapons that don't do status against them. They just won't be quite as good, which makes sense because mathematically they aren't as good. So why make the game defy its own reasoning right at the end of the game? That doesn't make sense. And I would argue that even though it encourages players, if liches are status immune, to bring weapons that are good against status immune enemies, that's a shallow and forced form of build diversity compared to simply allowing liches to be vulnerable to status and building them in such a way that you want different effects against them sometimes. That would be a more organic and natural and healthy and build uponable, developable form of build diversity. So I guess we've kind of dodged your first point about hybrid builds being king, because of course they are, as we established at the beginning. It's not that hybrid builds are king exactly, it's just that you want the most multipliers with the least mods because math, as long as everything is equal, and the only time you don't is when the math is crazy. So like with 100% status before additional multi-shot, the math that we're getting rid of in this update that's coming, the reason that you wanted a bunch of status and not crit isn't because magically that marginal benefit math doesn't work out anymore. It's because the game just forced it to be different by saying, if you have only a little status, you just get none because for some random reason we're dividing it among the pellets. But then if you get 100% before additional multi-shot, we'll just give you all the status of the universe. Like, we'll give you 1,000% status. And then it's not that it doesn't still make sense that all things being equal, multiplication is better than addition and you want more multipliers. It's that they cheated and made things not equal and made the addition be like, oh, but it's addition like a million times. Like, and so it's only status, but it's like all the status in the universe, you know. Oftentimes literally, and you build a weapon like that and you fire one shot and it removes like all armor from an enemy. So obviously that's not a fair comparison with like other multipliers. The absurdity of times of addition of more status becomes the multiplier. And that's, you know, that's confusing and unintuitive, so they're taking it out. Cool. And then the question becomes, will they make hybrid make sense in a different way by adding like super status over status that gives another multiplier, or won't they? But yes, of course, your first point maybe doesn't bear more mentioning because it's true. Like you want the most multipliers. So again, the discussion about whether or not these over status things are going to be good comes back to, will they be a separate multiplier that you get with a comparable amount of mods to another thing, which is bringing us to your third point, which is I think the crux of the issue. You said this change will probably benefit hybrid weapons as much, if not more, than status-only weapons. Here's why. At least I'm pretty sure I'm on the same page as you about this. There are weapons where, in the game right now, where a build that is good for them is currently a hybrid build that is, you know, base damage, multi-shot, crit mod, status mod, and then something else. Some of those weapons already reach 100% status chance. So if you add the ability to get some additional benefit from that, hybrid builds make even more sense for those weapons, and you're just unduly buffing what are already the best weapons in the game by giving them yet another damage multiplier, just like for existing, I guess. You know, a lot of weapons have been balanced to have really high status chance at the moment, partially because the benefit of getting a ton of it isn't that good at the moment. Like, it's wasteful and suboptimal to build a lot of status. Now, the player base is heinously misunderstood, partially because of distributed status chance and other lazy creators not explaining it, that, oh, look, a weapon can reach 100% status, so I'll do that, which is usually a horrible build and totally wasteful, because you don't really gain anything once you have a couple of status mods. Getting some more and making it, like, consistent or whatever doesn't do anything unless it was on those weapons where it magically did do something, and they're taking that out. So, but now, if they give us this over status thing, it does do something, and there are some weapons where you don't even really have to try to build it that way for it to do that. So we're put into a situation where, like I was mentioning before, if status effects that already give you another multiplier, like corrosive, viral slash, gas, whatever, if those status effects are the ones that give you yet another multiplier when you get their like over status effect, that's going to be insane. Like it's like one of those is going to do that, and that will become the best choice 100% of the time, and build diversity will be instantly dead. Is like, that's the risk. The doomsday scenario is that. The upshot is what I was talking about before with radiation. Let's say, theoretically, radiation with decent damage bonuses already, just a status effect that doesn't give you a damage multiplier currently. What if the overstatus radiation does give you a damage multiplier? And before I was saying that's not really viable because you'd have to run 4 mods or whatever rather than 2 to get a damage multiplier out of your status effect. But on some weapons you wouldn't need to do that. Some weapons you would have that much. And so on those weapons, that opens up build diversity while not harming it anywhere else. Okay, that's not bad. Another advantage of that is that if we look back to like a weapon with only status, you might have base damage, multi-shot, some usability mod usually, like reload speed or fire rate to increase cycle DPS. And then you'd have 4 status mods a lot of the time, right? That's at least what a lot of people were doing currently. What if the weapon does slash, it's slashy, and you build viral on it, but then you can also build radiation on it, and that gets you to over 100% status, giving you the over status effect of radiation, which is a bane effect. Now you have an equivalent amount of multipliers to a hybrid build with crit and status, except that you don't have crit, and you have a choice of what status effects you use. Build diversity, and it makes weapons that only have status significantly more viable, definitely not necessarily automatically as good as weapons that have crit and status, but certainly much closer to being the same, which is good because if it's a primary weapon and it only has crit, currently Hunter Munitions kind of just forces it to be viable because it gives you status automatically, and it's a very good, you get slash. This would level the playing field by allowing status-only weapons, too, like crit-only weapons, a viable path to at least the same number of damage multipliers, which is good balancing. That would add build diversity. That would make weapons that currently aren't good, and in a very interesting way. Sounds good to me. Cool. And as a bonus, you can see the cats. I don't really know what they're doing in there, but Roki doesn't fit in there. You can't see because he's black, but Mori is. He is in there, right? Mori, are you in there, buddy? Oh, no, he isn't. Wait, where did he go? Oh, he's... Okay. No, he's black, so you can't really see... Where did he go? Maury, are you okay? Oh, there you are. Hi. Here, come here. Let's talk to the people. Come on, buddy. As a bonus for getting through this very discussion-based video, you get to have the black puppers. Hello, you black puppers. How are you doing? What do you have to say about status over 100%? Over status, enhanced status, super status, double status? What do you want to call it? Oh, he's looking at Roki's butt through the other monitor. Anyway, hello, buddy. You want to go down? I think that's about it. So yeah, it could easily increase build diversity. I think that the most likely thing that will occur is that, like we described, status effects that already give you another multiplier, like corrosive, viral slash, gas, the ones we use, won't get another one with their over status effect. Those elements will probably have underwhelming over status. They certainly should, because they're already very powerful. We've heard some scary things. I definitely heard somebody say viral might keep going with over status, which sounds pretty overpowered, but whatever for now, And on the other hand, elements that didn't already give you another damage multiplier with their status effect will when they get over status, and it will be generally a more versatile or powerful damage multiplier. So for example, what if radiation's bane effect when you get over status is just bane effect to any faction, whatever faction you shoot, right? That would be really powerful. Basically, it's just like another multiplier that is never stacking with anything else. It's just always extra. Would be very strong. That would be really, really good. And the cost would be high. It wouldn't be worth it if you had a weapon that was crit and status and wasn't naturally going to get to 100%. But it would be good if you had nothing else but to get to 100%, and then it would step in and make the weapon viable in a way it wasn't before. That's very good. That sounds great. So that would be good. That's a good outcome. I'm a little bit curious also about, for example, the basic elements have effects that could stack pretty easily. Like electricity, you could just do more electricity, or the chain lightning critical strikes, toxin, you can just do a stronger toxin effect. Cold, you can make them even slower. Heat, you can make the burning damage multiplies itself, and then maybe heat's burning effect will actually finally do something because mathematically it seems like it should. It's just heinously weak for no apparent reason right now. So cool, that could be that's hopeful. Heat is also in an interesting place, I think we should mention, because it currently kind of gives you a second damage multiplier in that it removes a lot of armor once, and then it stacks up its damage, which again, for whatever reason, is just really, really bad right now and never really matters, even though mathematically the way it's implemented, you'd think it would. That's an element where you could see, if the enhanced version of heat status is something that is kind of a damage multiplier that could work with the kind of already a damage multiplier that it already is to make it overall viable. And that would be interesting because it would allow there to be builds with like 3 status mods where heat is a welcome addition at the end that isn't like busted but is powerful. Like it gives you kind of another damage multiplier, like a little bit. I can't think of like any builds off the top of my head where that immediately makes sense. It's just a theory that maybe that would be a nice thing that will end up happening. Who knows? Or like cold, you know. And then there are the status effects that are not currently viable and IPS. I'm not going to touch on IPS. I think that's a complicated issue, and IPS is already in a really weird place where impact is like fine. It juggles enemies and prevents them from hurting you while you kill them. That's not bad, it's just not as good as Slash is so overbearingly ridiculously powerful. And then Puncture has really good damage bonuses. It's just like its status effect doesn't really do anything. It reduces damage enemies deal. I bet Puncture will just like reduce damage enemies deal even more, which is like, I don't care. But there are some status effects where I don't know, like it's pretty up in the air, like what will this thing do? And it's already of rather limited viability, or shows up a lot, not necessarily always welcome, and it would be interesting and impactful, like it will matter a lot of times what the over status version of it is. Blast is a very good example. Blast is, I think, the most common innate elemental damage type, and so it is the type that will most often, not by your choice, be giving you its over status effect if building this way becomes a powerful thing. And so what it does, like what you get from it when it's an overstatus, matters quite a bit, not really for balancing purposes in terms of like what you'll build, like not for build diversity, but more for innate weapon power balancing purposes. Like a lot of weapons, you just will be getting that for free. So you should look at it as, do the weapons that automatically give you blast really need to be given X effect? Because like most of the time, that's what it's going to be. Does the Brahma really need, does the Kuva Ogress really need like whatever enhanced status effect? Because it will often be getting it for free. And that has nothing to do with how you build. It won't increase build diversity necessarily. It'll just be there. So that's worth considering. And then obviously the elephant in the room is magnetic. And I invite you to imagine the many things that they could make magnetic do. Again, my fear is that magnetic will be like made viable by just not even bothering to fix its normal effect and giving it some other effect with overstatus, which I hope doesn't happen. However, I do want to mention that something I've been going for a while is magnetic pulling enemies together into a clump. Like you magnetize an enemy and then they suck just one time. It's not mags magnetize. They just sucks enemies together one time. You just get a brief vacuum, like powerful, but they just suck together. So this would be really good with gas. And you remember before I was saying the most likely place that build diversity will increase is with weapons that only have status and don't have crit, where currently those weapons are worse because they lack a multiplier to build to that hybrid weapons don't. But if you give over status effects an effect that is comparable to another multiplier, then that will be fixed, that will change. And those weapons will be not only viable because they have similar amounts of multipliers with similar power level, they'll also be really different because they'll be using status effects you normally wouldn't use, but are good when you would want to use them, So like radiation, you wouldn't normally build on a hybrid weapon with crit and status, but on a weapon with only status, it's not like, oh, well, there's nothing else, so I guess I'll do radiation. Like you uniquely get to benefit from its powerful effect because you put two more status mods on, you get the over status. So radiation pairs with viral, so Bane effect cool with viral and slash. Gas and magnetic pair. Gas is good if you hit a lot of enemies in a group. Magnetic's enhanced status effect might group enemies. Synergy, cool. And then that would create 2 really interesting archetypes. If you have a weapon that has no crit, then you can decide, do you want to go the viral radiation style or the magnetic gas style? And they would both be really good. Like that's awesome. Again, I have no idea what Blast is going to do, but Corrosive and Blast doesn't need any help. Those are already very common damage types. Cool. So, I don't know. I mean, I want to say that I started this video. Wow, 24 minutes. A lot less optimistic than I am now. So thank you for asking this, Mr.FOoT. I really like doing these because they allow me to explore these ideas in a way that I wouldn't always. And I just really like doing this channel, and this is part of why. So thank you for asking this very apt question, and I hope other people found it valuable and found what I was suggesting an interesting proposal. We will see if that's what we get, but I hope it is, and let's see what happens. I have a prediction for the end of the video. I bet that people will not think of, the people in general, not like plenty of you will, you're all smart people, but the community in general will not think of it this way. And when the update comes out and people skim the patch notes, not really thinking critically about them, someone will say this thing: corrosive, the only viable status type, doesn't have a good enhanced status effect. Therefore, enhanced status effects are not viable, which, as we've discussed here, is a good signpost that our developers know what they're doing and they probably are viable and they're just not super busted, right? Looking forward to it. Something that I could have talked about during this video, but I chose not to, maybe we'll talk about it another time, is the fact that they added those 90% status and nothing else mods, which in the current system, the current way the game works, those mods don't matter. Even the buffed versions, which we don't have yet, it really doesn't matter. You almost never would want that over just like running your hybrid stuff because it's simply less multipliers. But in the new system, they may allow builds to achieve that over status without distracting from whatever status type they have. Imagine if corrosive, I hope not, does have a good over status effect, and then you run 2 mods to make corrosive, and then like the 90% mod that gives you status, and then like hammer shot because memes, and then you get over 100% status, but you only have corrosive. And then if that effect is really good, it could get pretty crazy, right? I don't know, just something we could have spent 10 minutes talking about that I decided not to, but I still thought was interesting. Oh boy. I want to thank Mr.FOoT once again for their support. I've been Zandy. That's been an analysis of what will happen with enhanced status effects, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'll talk to you soon.